Donald Trump just got nightmare news in his criminal prosecution of Don Lemon and others who were with Don Lemon in Minnesota during the Trump invasion of Minneapolis and St. Paul and other areas with the ICE and Border Patrol Gestapo several months back. The news is that the federal judge is now ordering the grand jury materials, which would otherwise stay secret, to be submitted in camera before the federal judge for her review. In other words, what we've been seeing now take place across this country as the presumption of regularity once afforded to the DOJ has been utterly destroyed by the Trump regime's corruption and cover-ups. We're seeing it play out in this case where the federal judge said balancing the competing interests of maintaining secrecy for grand jury materials against whether a ground may exist to dismiss the indictment because of a matter that occurred before the grand jury. The court agrees with the defendants that an in-camera review of the grand jury materials is appropriate under Rule 6E and necessary to rule on their objections to Magistrate Judge Miko's order. Interestingly, the magistrate judge actually ruled not to review the grand jury materials. The magistrate judge isn't an Article 3 judge, and ultimately it's the federal judge's call if you object to the magistrate judge's order. That's what Don Lemon and the other defendants did here. And there's over a dozen, almost 24 defendants who have been brought into this criminal case. But the most prominent one being Don Lemon, but you've also had Nikema Levy Armstrong, which is a prominent journalist, and others who were at that church at the time. And the Trump regime said, you invaded the church. And they said, no, we were reporting on what was actually taking place. And there were protests. And this is what journalists and reporters do. But I think this is what if you go back to when we were doing this analysis, what we've seen over and over again, when the federal judge is able to review the grand jury material in camera, which means the judge will get to look at it. It doesn't get published publicly yet. The judge will take the first review of it. We've generally seen the Trump regime DOJ engaging in grand jury misconduct in such a wide-ranging amount of cases. I mean, this is obviously a very high-profile one, but there are medium-profile cases and cases that are less well-known where the same rampant grand jury misconduct has been found. I'm thinking about a lot of cases in Chicago, but really throughout this country as well. And so the federal judge will look at this material and we'll see, did the prosecutors manipulate the grand jury, fabricate information before the grand jury, engage in something called vouching, where they say, this is a good case. We've got good evidence that I'm not going to show you. We'll show you later, but I'm telling you, we need your help on this one. Were they providing incorrect legal instructions? And there's a lot of red flags in this one because we all saw the tape, of Don Lemon and a lot of these defendants. Like, it's on video. And so we could all see it and we're like, okay, there's not a crime on the tape. So did you show the grand jury the tape? Did the grand jury know there was a tape? Did you explain the First Amendment implications, DOJ, when you met with the grand jury to get the indictment? Are they aware of First Amendment issues and First Amendment defenses? Or did you just have an FBI agent tell a one-sided story of event, knowing that the video was exculpatory and not show it? I want to bring in Harry Litman from the Talking Feds YouTube channel, Talking Feds Substack, and Talking Feds podcast. And Harry, there has to be this threshold finding by a federal judge to request grand jury material. What's fascinating to me is you almost wonder, Harry, why didn't federal judges always request the grand jury materials? But because the presumption of regularity was such that we trusted the DOJ, that was never really a thing. I mean, it was always viewed as a secret proceeding. We never said, you can't trust them. They're always going to fabricate evidence. But it's a fascinating concept because my own view is like, we should always, what's the harm at all if the judge just looks at it, just makes the call. But there was this presumption that the DOJ, that they were the good guys in theory, not always, but, and that they would follow the law, or at least follow the presumption of that. conduct themselves with this presumption. Harry, what do you make of this all?
Yeah, look, but in theory, the jury is supposed to be the grand jury, a black box. You don't know why they decided, but it's just as you say, it's about the classic case for presumption of regularity that you may not pierce unless you really got something concrete. It's now happened in case after case, and moreover, in case after case, the DOJ has made just elementary blunders in the grand jury, as you say, vouching, possibly misinstructions. We have in the reflecting pool case, there's going to be an effort to look at what happened there because there may have been faulty instructions on the key element of damages. And it seems to happen. It's not simply that it's kind of amateur hour at the DOJ because the pros have left the building, but also it seems to happen disproportionately with these obviously political, high profile prosecutions that Trump and now Blanche and others really want to make a big deal of. So, remember Don Lemon, that was a personal kind of cause for Pam Bondi. She came to Minnesota, and it was always had the potential for a total crash and burn, because the thrust of Lemon's defense from the start has been, I was covering news here. And of course, I was speaking to some of the people who were in demonstrators. Guess what? That's how journalists gather news. And that aspect of things, they really are going to need in court, if they can ever bring it through, to completely separate out his First Amendment activity. But likewise in the grand jury, he has made a motion to dismiss on 3 different bases. One of them, and it's joined by some 45 news organizations, is just this. This is the criminal prosecution of First Amendment activity. You may not do that, government. And then Lemon is saying, and he's joining a large club, this is a vindictive reprisal prosecution. Donald Trump doesn't like me. And in 2026, in this Department of Justice, or 2025, that's a good enough reason to find yourself getting mugshots and having to show up in court. And I was a prosecutor for many years, and as you know, and these kinds of motions would come in, and they really would provoke, I think, from prosecutors and the court, a kind of, every defendant feels that they're being railroaded, except now we have a series of defendants who are being railroaded, have been railroaded, and by railroaded, I mean they didn't have the facts and the law, and they did it for patently improper reasons, like whether you're in the doghouse, whatever it takes to get there, with Donald Trump. So from the start, this has been, especially for Lemon and one other colleague, the possible very vulnerable situation that could end in another debacle and embarrassment. But I think the bottom line, I've read Lemon's papers, and I think it's arguable that in a DOJ that enjoyed the presumption of regularity, a judge might kind of gloss over it and say, no, if you have some points, you'll make them a trial. If the jury believes you, you'll be acquitted. But these guys have really lost their reputation. And especially, by the way, in Minnesota, where, the whole ICE operation was so chilling, over the top, and replete with lies. Again and again, the situation of, they were resisting arrest, and then it turned out not to be, and they were releasing them. So we've known from the start this would be Lemon's tack, and we've known from the time of the arrest, man, this is really unusual stuff. But the fact that the magistrate and now the district court is saying, I'm going to look at that transcript, something they really do, or certainly used to do very rarely. This is the potential. It was at this point that other cases have been dismissed, and this has the potential of being a real debacle, because you have these high profile cases and these new recruits or maybe true believers who really want to get the job done for Pam Bondi or Todd Blanche or Donald Trump, and they go too far in the grand jury. They vouch, as you say, or smush over things or misinform. And every time that happens, it's just head spinning. It's happened in this administration easily 10 times as much as I've seen in my entire career before it.
We're seeing this nationwide. I want that.
Yeah.
I want our audience to know that, as you point out. I mean, we're seeing this behavior exist where there have been very serious prosecutions that have been dismissed, massive fraud cases, and everyone's presumed innocent, Harry. But, there are cases, these are the high profile ones that we talk about a lot. But there are lots of cases where there seem to be some pretty bad behavior. I mean, death cases, other things where you've seen, cases thrown out on technicalities under this Trump regime, because they make a lot of errors and they make a lot of, and they exist with such intentional malice and they're dumb. So it's a combination of incompetence and malice. It's easy to smoke out, and competent criminal defense lawyers and public defenders, federal public defenders who are smart, they get it. They see this type of stuff all the time, and they're like, what'd you do? And you call it out. And it's sad to see, as a lawyer, lawyers behave maliciously and incompetently. And you look at it like they're evil and they're dumb. It's like a really bad combination for a lawyer. Anything else you want to say, Harry, before we go?
Oh, I just want to say, I know you didn't exactly mean this, but we're not really talking about technicalities, because yes, there are things they don't do right. They don't dot their I's and cross their T's. They are amateurish. But when you take, the grand jury, we already know, is not as much of a bulwark as people often believe. But when you take even that lower wall and then just, deceive or hoodwink or rush or do things in the grand jury to make them bring charges in a fundamentally having just failed to follow the rules. The rules are like first grade textbook that you learn. And so it often means not just, you didn't do the instructions at the right time. It often means that you basically, and you're all alone there, no defense lawyer, et cetera, you basically kind of covered over your own weakness or vouched for things. And that's serious, because otherwise a grand jury might actually have not gone forward. So, as these things come out there, and you're right, all over the country, that big case in Chicago, they really are grave as well as stupid.
Everybody, make sure you subscribe to Harry Litman's YouTube channel. It's called Talking Feds. Just search Talking Feds and tell Harry in the comments I say hello. Thanks, Harry.
Thank you, Ben.
Breaking news right now. My brothers and I wrote a book. It's called WTF America. And well, doesn't that just say it all? It comes out officially this October, but you can pre-order your copy today. Just scan the QR code or click the link in the description below.